Welcome back to the second part of our tutorial on objects in R. If you remember from the previous tutorial, we talked a little bit about what objects are and mentioned that there are two major types of objects that we will be using over the course of the semester. We'll be looking at vectors and we'll be looking at data frames. So let me talk a little bit more now about what a data frame is and how we can create them and how we can use them. So think of a data frame as a collection of variables, and these variables are arranged in columns, and each value of the variable then has its own row, and so you get something that looks sort of like a spreadsheet if you're familiar with Excel or any other spreadsheet type of program. There are a few ways to create data frames, and so the first way that we can create a data frame is actually creating the entire data frame, entering all the data in R itself. And this can be a little bit cumbersome, but if we have smaller data frames, it might in the end be relatively simple to do this. So if we create a data frame, we give it a name, might be frame1. Here's our assignment operator. And then the function we're going to use is no longer the C function. That's what we use to create vectors. Now we're going to use the function data.frame. Okay, parentheses. And what we're going to do then is we're going to give the names of the columns. So our first column in our data frame might be diameter equals, and here's where we're going to input a vector of values for our first column. So our values, we have three values for this particular column, might be 20.1, 18.5, 19.1, and so on. All right. Then we're going to add then we're going to add a second column, which is predation, and we might have three values for that: yes, no, yes. So this might be a data frame that shows whether a particular plant was or wasn't eaten, and so we can maybe make some conclusions based on the size or the diameter of the stem. And who knows, we only have 3 data points, but maybe the predator prefers something that looks plants that are a bit smaller. So alas. All right. So let's create this data frame, and then I'll show you how to click on an object in Environment window to display that particular object or this particular data frame. Right. Back over to R, we might want to add a comment just for the heck, so we say this is a tutorial number 4 that we're in. So we're creating data frames, and we want to create the data frame frame1. It's our assignment operator. We're now using the function data.frame to create it. Our first column is diameter, and that's going to equal these values, which we have to express in a vector: 20.1, comma, 18.5, comma, 19.1, and we close the parentheses. Okay, comma, because we're going to add another column, and our next column is going to be predation. Oops. That's name equals, again, we're going to use C. We're going to make a vector of values. And these, remember, are character values, so you have to put them in quotes. Yes, no, yes, close quotes. There we go. That's our line for frame1. So when we run it, we create something that's a data frame that's now called frame1. And notice that it appears in a slightly different place in our environment window. Instead of appearing as a value, as a vector, it appears as a data object, as a data frame. And there are a couple of ways that we can look at this and see what's inside it. First of all, we can click on this arrow over here, this little down arrow, and it will display our 2 columns, diameter and predation. And then we can basically see each of these columns as a vector, right? So this is a numeric vector over here. This is a vector that has factors as elements. Another way that we can look at it is we can click not on the arrow but on the name itself, and frame1 will appear over here as something that you probably could recognize as a really simple little spreadsheet. 2 columns, diameter and predation, 3 row numbers, and here are the diameter values, and here are the predation values. So that's a very basic example of creating a data frame in R itself. Okay? One other way that we can create a data frame in R itself might be to combine some existing vectors. So let's create a second data frame. And the second data frame, we're again going to use our data frame function. We're going to create two columns. One is N bases for nitrogenous bases, if you remember our A, T, C, and G. And the other is the type of base, and we're going to use our vector B types over here for our type of base, purine or pyrimidine. The key, though, is that you can't just combine these two vectors randomly. The vectors have to be the same length. All right? And in each case, bases and B types have 4 elements in them. So let's create this vector. Let's create this data frame. Frame 2 is data.frame. Nitrogenous bases are going to equal the vector bases, and remember I'm building on our document of practice lab script lines over here, so that bases is already defined. We defined bases over here, comma, and now we want the type of base that it is, so type equals, and again we defined B types over here as a vector. So we will put in base types, B types. And when, oops. Yeah, and I misspelled B types again. All right, so this is something that happens, and get pretty good at figuring out what's wrong. There we go. All right, run that. So here's frame 2, and if we want to look at frame 2, nitrogenous bases, type, purine, pyrimidine, etc. That's what we would expect. Okay. So a third way to create a data frame in R is to read in a document that has been created someplace outside of R. And as you probably gathered, R is a really lousy place to enter data. It's a really great place to analyze data. So often we can use R and Excel sort of side by side. We enter the data in Excel and then we do our analysis with it in R. So the Excel can save a file in a number of different formats. It seems that the format that often works the best for transporting into R is what's known as a .csv, or a comma-separated value file. All right, so I've put on my desktop a comma-separated value file, gall data, and we're going to read in. I'm going to show you how to upload the galldata.csv file, and then we're going to read it in to the R environment as frame 3. So here we go. So the first thing we have to do is we have to read in the gall data. So here's our Bio 314 folder. We want eventually this to go into our 314 folder, so let's open it. And I have already done that just to make sure it worked, but let's do it again for here. So I'll delete this just to show you how it's done. Yeah. All right. So let's do an upload. So here's a little upload button in our files tab. So we're going to upload. All right, that's the directory where it's going. So we're going to choose the file, and it's sitting right here on my desktop. So I'm going to choose it, galldata2018.csv. I'm going to open it, click OK, and there it is. Galldata2018.csv is now a file that's in it's one of our files in our home directory. Okay, but while it's a file in the home directory, notice that it hasn't yet appeared over here as a data frame in our list of data frames. So you have to do something else to get it to appear over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a read command. So let's create a new data frame called data frame 3. Assignment operator. What's going to be in this? Well, let's read a CSV file. This is a function. Which file? Well, in quotes, we're going to put the path. And so we're going to start in the home directory. That's default, so we don't need to specify that. But it's in the folder Bio 314 / that's what we tell it to look in there. And the name of the file is galldata2018.csv. After the CSV, close the comma, and this hopefully will read it in. There we go. All right, so here is frame 3, and you can tell that it's a much bigger data frame. It has 141 objects or rows in it in 8 different variables. So here are the 8 different variables if we want to see what this looks like. There it is, and so you can certainly tell that this is a much bigger data frame than the ones we were just working with. So clearly, if we can enter this data like this in something else and read it in, that's a good thing to do. All right. So we have created data frame 3 with this data set that we imported and then read into the R environment. One last note about this is that there is a way over here, there's a button that says import dataset. And so it's kind of tempting to say, ooh, yeah, let me do that. And so we can import something from text or we can import something from Excel, and this looks like, on the surface, it's going to save us a whole lot of time. But I've tried using these import functions, and one of the things that I've noticed is that as tempting as they may look, they don't always play well with particular file types. And for Excel files, this import function sometimes does a really bad job of trying to pick the type of character that is in a column. So sometimes it thinks of, the type of class that a column is. So sometimes it looks at a character column and thinks it's a factor, or will look at a factor column and think it's a character column, or sometimes it even sees numbers as characters. So this can be, in the end, actually more time consuming to straighten out than just using the read.csv function. And the other thing is, if you ever need to get back to frame 3, if you mess something up in your code later on, you just want to get back to frame 3, if you have the read.csv line, you just rerun it, and there you go. You're back to your starting point, which is often a really great thing to be able to do. All right, so a few notes now that we've learned how to create data frames. So we said that data frames have columns, and one of the things that we'd sure like to do sometimes is specify a particular column. And so one of the easiest ways to do that is with the form data frame name $. The $sign indicates that what is following is going to be the column name. So for example, if we wanted to specify the column diameter in our frame 1, we write frame 1 $, diameter. So let's look at how that would work. Frame 1 $, diameter over here, and notice that RStudio does a pretty good job of guessing after a few letters what columns you want to type. Run this line, and so it shows us the values over here, the 3 values that we put in our diameter column. All right? So in other words, it gives us a vector from this column. We can also use this notation to add a column, and this can be very handy. So suppose we want to add a column to an existing data frame. So let's add, say, one more column. We're going to add the column height. We can do that by saying name of the frame, $, and then the column name, but this is now a new column name. And then we can specify the vector of data that we're going to put into that column. Again, the one key requirement is that this vector that we're putting in has to be the same length as the existing columns that are already in the data frame. All right, so let's try creating a new column, height. All right, so frame 1 $, height. Here's our new column name, our assignment operator. We're going to put a vector in, and we're going to put in the values 1.6, 2.5, and 3.2. There we go. We run it. Okay, and now when we come over and look at our frame 1, we see that it has diameter, predation, and height. We've added that third column. All right. There are a few practice problems to try. So try to create a data frame with 2 columns, right? The letters of your names, right? First and last, and we did that in our previous tutorial. And also then another vector with the words first and last, right? And so first words for the letters of your first name, last for the letters of your last name. We also did that in the previous tutorial. So see if you can build on that to create a data frame with these two columns, right? And then add a third column of data that has the number for each letter in your name. And remember, we also did that in our previous vector tutorial as well. Right. I'll pause, and if you'd like to give this a try, click resume when you've given it a shot. Okay, let's see how we might do this. So let's call our new data frame that we're going to create something like the name frame. Even better than the name games, the name frame. All right. And it's going to be a data frame over here. That's a type of object. Okay, parentheses. And our first column is going to be the letters in the name. So let's call this over here letters. That's going to be our column name. So letters equals, and the vector that I created was both names. All right, so your vector might have had a different name, but I'm going to use both names because that's the vector I created over here. Okay, we need a second column now with this a factor vector with the words first and last. So let's call this over here. The column might be F and L for first and last. Oops, we need an equal sign. And then the vector where I did that over here was name letters. So let's put in name letters. All right, very good. Oops, and we don't need that. We need it right here. Okay, so here we go. We now have a new data frame. Call it the name frame, and it has the letters of your first and last names. And over here, FL tells you whether it's first or last. All right. Last thing we're going to do in this practice set is we're going to add a third column of data, that is the vector with the number of each letter in your name. And I think probably the simplest way to do it is to use the name of our newly created data frame, name frame, but we're going to add a new column. All right, so there's our the $sign tells us that we're going to look at a column, and this column name might be, let's call it number, 4-letter number. All right, so what are we going to assign to this column? Well, we want to assign this vector over here that has the numbers 1 through 11. So I called it name numbers. Name numbers, there it is, and we run it. And now when we look at our name frame, data frame, we have letters, and we have first and last, and we have the numbers 1 through 11. So here are the key skills for the data frame portion of this tutorial. So create a data frame with a series of individual elements. So this is creating a data frame from scratch, entering all of the elements in each of the columns. Create a data frame by combining existing vectors, and we did a couple of examples of that, right? Know how to upload a CSV, comma-separated value file, into R, and then use the read.csv function to turn that file into a data frame in the R environment. Add a column to a data frame and display a column of data. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know. Hope you found this tutorial helpful, and catch you for the next one.